The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, turning the downtown streets into rivers of neon reflections. Richard Chen pulled his black Mercedes into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, a place he never would have stopped at under normal circumstances. But his phone was dead, he was lost, and his son Danny was getting restless in the back seat. "Dad, I'm hungry," Danny said, his voice carrying that edge it got when his blood sugar dropped too low. "I know, buddy. We're going to get you something right now." Richard looked at the modest diner through the rain-streaked windshield. It wasn't the kind of place a man like him usually ate. His world was private clubs and five-star restaurants, places where people knew his name and his net worth. But tonight, none of that mattered. He helped Danny out of the car, steadying him as they made their way across the wet pavement. Danny's cerebral palsy made walking difficult on good days, and the rain only made things worse. His 11-year-old son gripped his arm tightly, his legs moving in that distinctive, uneven pattern that had become second nature to both of them. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an elderly woman nursing a cup of coffee in the corner booth. The place smelled like coffee and grilled onions, the kind of honest, working-class smell that reminded Richard of a life he'd left behind decades ago. "Sit anywhere you like," called a woman from behind the counter. She was young, probably mid-20s, with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her name tag read Keisha. She had kind eyes, the kind that seemed to see straight through all the expensive suits and watches to the person underneath. Richard guided Danny to a booth near the back, the vinyl seats cracked but clean. Danny was breathing hard from the walk, his face flushed. Richard felt that familiar twist in his chest, the one that came every time he saw his son struggle with something that should have been simple. "You okay, champ?" Danny nodded, but Richard could see the frustration in his eyes. His son hated being different, hated needing help with everything. At 11, Danny was starting to understand just how much harder his life was going to be than other kids his age. Keisha appeared at their table with 2 menus and glasses of water. "Welcome to Rosie's. First time here?" "That obvious?" Richard asked with a tired smile. "The suit kind of gives it away," she said, but there was no judgment in her voice, just a friendly observation. She looked at Danny with genuine warmth. "And who's this handsome young man?" "I'm Danny," his son said, his words coming out slower than most kids, each syllable requiring effort. "Nice to meet you, Danny. I'm Keisha. Are you hungry? We make the best burgers in the city, at least that's what I tell people." Danny smiled, and Richard felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. People didn't always know how to talk to Danny. Some acted like he wasn't there, directing all their questions to Richard. Others spoke too loudly as if he were deaf or used baby talk, as if his physical challenges meant he couldn't understand. But Keisha was talking to him like he was just another kid, and Danny responded to it. They ordered burgers and fries, and Keisha brought Danny a chocolate milkshake without being asked. "Growing boys need their strength," she said with a wink. As they ate, Richard watched Keisha work. She moved through the diner with an easy grace, refilling coffee cups, chatting with the regulars, laughing at jokes the cook shouted from the kitchen. There was something about her that caught his attention. Not just her kindness to Danny, though that meant more to him than she could know. It was the way she seemed genuinely content, as if serving coffee and burgers was exactly what she wanted to be doing. Richard had spent his entire adult life chasing success. He'd built his software company from nothing, working 100-hour weeks, sacrificing everything for the next deal, the next milestone. His wife had left him 3 years ago, tired of coming second to his ambition. She'd said he didn't know how to be present, how to just exist in a moment without thinking about the next thing he needed to accomplish. Looking at Keisha now, he wondered if his ex-wife had been right. The diner door opened and a group of teenagers tumbled in, loud and full of energy. They were obviously from the high school down the street, still wearing their basketball practice jerseys. They crowded into a large booth, all talking at once, and Keisha headed over to take their order. Danny watched them with hungry eyes. Richard knew that look. His son wanted what they had so desperately: the easy movement, the casual way they belonged in their own bodies, the friendship that came from shared experiences he couldn't have. Danny's school had been difficult. Other kids could be cruel without even meaning to be, and Danny had learned to keep to himself. "Dad," Danny said quietly, "can we go soon? You don't like your burger?" "It's good." I just want to go home. Richard understood. Being around other kids Danny's age only highlighted everything he couldn't do, couldn't be. It was easier to stay home, to exist in their own little world where Danny's limitations didn't feel so limiting. But then something unexpected happened. The jukebox in the corner suddenly crackled to life and an old soul song started playing. Richard didn't know the name, but he recognized the sound of it. The kind of music his grandmother used to play when he was young. Keisha was walking past the teenager's table with a tray of sodas when the music hit her. She stopped, closed her eyes for just a second, and then her body began to move. It wasn't dramatic or showy. She just swayed a little, her hips catching the rhythm as she set down the drinks. One of the basketball players said something to her and she laughed, doing a little spin that made her ponytail whip around. "Come on," one of the girls at the table said. "Show us your moves, Keisha." "I'm working," Keisha protested, but she was smiling. "Just one dance," the kids chanted. One dance. And then Keisha did something that Richard would never forget. She set down her tray and she danced. Right there in the middle of the diner, between the tables and chairs, she moved to the music with complete unself-consciousness. She wasn't a professional dancer. Her moves were simple, just the kind of dancing people do when they're happy and the music is good. But there was joy in it, pure and uncomplicated. The teenagers started clapping in rhythm. The truckers at the counter turned to watch, grinning. Even the elderly woman in the corner was tapping her foot. And Keisha danced like nobody was watching, even though everybody was. Danny sat up straighter in his seat, his eyes wide. Richard saw his son's foot tapping under the table, trying to catch the beat. Danny loved music. At home, he'd sit for hours listening to songs, his body moving as much as it could to the rhythm, but he'd never danced in front of anyone. He was too self-conscious, too aware of how his body didn't move the way it was supposed to. The song was ending when Keisha noticed Danny watching her. She danced over to their table, slightly out of breath, her face flushed with happiness. "You like this song, Danny?" He nodded, suddenly shy. "You want to dance with me?" Richard felt his heart stop. This was it. The moment when his son would be exposed, when someone would see him try and fail, when the kindness would turn to pity. He wanted to say no, to protect Danny from the embarrassment, from the pain of not being able to do what other kids could do. But before Richard could speak, Danny was nodding again, more vigorously this time. "Yeah," he said, his voice stronger than usual. "Yeah, I want to dance." Keisha held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Danny took it. She helped him slide out of the booth, supporting him as he found his balance. The jukebox had moved on to another song, something with a slower, steadier beat. Richard watched, his throat tight, as his son stood there in the middle of Rosie's diner, holding hands with a waitress he'd just met. And then, incredibly, Danny started to move. It wasn't graceful. Danny's movements were jerky, uncoordinated, his feet struggling to find the rhythm. But Keisha didn't seem to notice or care. She moved with him, matching her steps to his, holding his hands firmly but gently. When he stumbled, she caught him. When he got the beat right, she smiled like he'd just won an Olympic medal. "That's it," she said softly. "You've got it. Feel the music, don't think about it so much." The teenagers had gone quiet. The whole diner had. Richard tensed, waiting for the laughter, the whispers, the looks. But they never came. Instead, one of the basketball players started clapping slowly in time with the music. Then another joined in. Within seconds, the whole diner was clapping, creating a rhythm for Danny to follow. And something magical happened. With everyone supporting him, with Keisha guiding him, with the music moving through him, Danny forgot to be self-conscious. His body relaxed. His movements became less forced. He wasn't dancing well by any conventional standard, but he was dancing his way, and in that moment it was beautiful. Richard felt tears burning his eyes. He'd spent years taking Danny to physical therapy, to specialists, to doctors who promised they could help him move better, be stronger, fit in more easily. They'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on treatments and equipment. And here, in a cheap diner, a waitress he'd never met before had given his son something none of that money could buy. A moment of pure, unself-conscious joy. The song ended and the diner erupted in applause. Danny was breathing hard, his face red, but he was grinning wider than Richard had seen in months. Keisha high-fived him and several of the teenagers called out encouragements. "That was awesome, little man. You got some moves." Danny looked at his father, his eyes shining. "Dad, did you see?" "I danced." "I saw, buddy. You were amazing." Keisha helped Danny back to the booth, making sure he was steady before she let go. "You're a natural," she told him. "You should dance more often." "Really?" Danny asked, and the hope in his voice broke Richard's heart. "Really. Music doesn't care how you move. It just wants you to feel it." After she walked away to check on other tables, Danny couldn't stop talking about it. The dance, the music, how his feet had found the rhythm, how everyone had clapped for him. It was like a switch had been flipped inside him. The quiet, withdrawn boy who'd wanted to leave earlier was gone, replaced by an excited kid who couldn't wait to tell everyone about what he'd done. When Keisha brought the check, Richard looked at it and nearly laughed. $23 for 2 burgers, fries, and a milkshake. He pulled out his wallet and placed $500 bills on the table. "Sir," Keisha said when she came back, "I think there's been a mistake with your payment." "No mistake," Richard said quietly. "The extra is for you." "I can't accept this." She tried to hand back the bills, but Richard stood up, helping Danny put on his jacket. "You gave my son something tonight that money usually can't buy. Please take it, and thank you." "Thank you more than you know." Keisha looked at the money, then at Danny, then back at Richard. Her eyes were misty. "He's a special kid. You're lucky to have him." "I know," Richard said, and for the first time in a long time he really meant it. Lately he'd been so focused on what Danny couldn't do, on the challenges they faced, that he'd forgotten to just appreciate his son for who he was. As they headed to the door, Danny turned back. "Keisha, can we come back sometime? To dance again?" "Anytime," she said with a warm smile. "I'm here Tuesday through Saturday evenings. You come back whenever you want." The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. As Richard helped Danny into the car, he felt different somehow. Lighter, like he'd been carrying a weight he didn't even know was there, and someone had lifted it from his shoulders. On the drive home, Danny talked nonstop. About the music, about Keisha, about how the other kids had clapped for him. Richard listened, really listened, in a way he realized he hadn't done in too long. He'd been so busy trying to fix things to make Danny's life easier that he'd forgotten to just be present with his son. That night, after Danny was asleep, Richard sat in his home office, staring at the city lights through his window. His penthouse apartment was everything he'd dreamed of when he was young and hungry and building his company. Floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, art that cost more than most people's houses. But it felt empty tonight. He thought about Keisha, about the ease with which she'd moved through that diner, the genuine happiness on her face. She was probably making minimum wage plus tips, living paycheck to paycheck, but she'd seemed more content than he'd felt in years. When was the last time he'd done something just for the joy of it? When was the last time he'd danced? The next morning, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the diner. He went through his meetings on autopilot, his mind wandering back to Danny's face when he was dancing, to the kindness of a stranger who'd seen his son as more than his disability. That evening, instead of working late as usual, Richard went home early. He found Danny in his room, listening to music on his headphones. "Hey, champ, want to dance?" Danny looked up, surprised. His father wasn't usually home this early, and he certainly didn't usually ask to dance. "Really? Really? Show me what Keisha taught you." They danced in the living room, just the two of them, Danny teaching his billionaire father how to feel the music instead of thinking so hard about everything. Richard was terrible at it, far worse than Danny, and they both ended up laughing so hard they had to sit down. "Dad," Danny said, catching his breath, "can we really go back to the diner? To see Keisha again?" "Absolutely. How about tomorrow?" Danny's face lit up like Christmas morning. They went back the next evening and the evening after that. Each time Keisha was there, and each time she made time to dance with Danny. Sometimes it was just for one song. Sometimes, when the diner was slow, they'd dance to 2 or 3. The regulars got used to seeing them, and several of them started joining in, creating impromptu dance parties in the middle of the diner. Richard noticed changes in Danny. His son was more confident, more willing to try new things. At school, he'd started talking to other kids instead of keeping to himself. He was smiling more, laughing more. The dance sessions at the diner had awakened something in him, a belief that he could do things, be things, that he'd thought were impossible. But Richard noticed changes in himself too. He started leaving work earlier, spending more time with Danny. He realized that all those late nights at the office hadn't been making him happier, or even more successful. They'd just been a way to avoid the painful parts of life, the messy parts that money couldn't fix. One evening, about 2 weeks after their first visit, Richard arrived at the diner to find it more crowded than usual. It was Keisha's birthday, and the other waitresses had decorated the place with streamers and balloons. Danny had insisted they bring a present. He'd picked it out himself with money from his allowance, a small silver bracelet with a charm shaped like a musical note. "For me?" Keisha said when Danny presented it to her, carefully wrapped in paper he'd decorated himself. "Because you taught me to dance," Danny explained, "and that's like music." Keisha knelt down to Danny's level, tears streaming down her face. "This is the most beautiful present anyone's ever given me." She put the bracelet on right away, showing it off to everyone in the diner. Later, when things had quieted down, Richard found himself talking to Keisha during her break. Really talking, the way he rarely did with anyone anymore. "You've changed my son's life," he told her. "You know that, right?" Keisha shook her head. "I just danced with him. That's all." "No, you saw him. Really saw him. Not his disability, not his challenges. Just him. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" She was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee. "My little brother had Down syndrome," she said finally. "He passed away 3 years ago. He was 15. People used to talk over him like he wasn't even there. Or they'd treat him like a baby. It used to make me so angry." "I'm sorry," Richard said. He loved to dance too. Didn't matter that he couldn't move the way other kids did. When the music played, he was happy. That's all that mattered. She looked up at Richard, her eyes distant with memory. "When I saw Danny watching me dance, I saw my brother. I couldn't not ask him to join in. Well, I'm grateful you did. He talks about you all the time. You're his hero." Keisha laughed, wiping her eyes. "I'm just a waitress." "You're so much more than that," Richard said, and he meant it. In his world of billionaires and executives, he'd met plenty of people with impressive titles and accomplishments. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd met someone with a truly good heart. Over the following weeks, Richard kept coming back. At first, he told himself it was for Danny, and that was certainly part of it. But he'd be lying if he said Keisha wasn't another reason. There was something about her that drew him in. Richard had dated plenty of women since his divorce. Models, executives, socialites. Women who understood his world, who moved in the same circles, attended the same charity galas. But conversations with them always felt like business negotiations. "What do you do? What's your company worth? Where did you summer?" Everything was about status and connections. Talking to Keisha was different. She asked him about Danny, about what made him laugh, about his favorite memories from childhood. She told him stories about the regular customers at the diner, about her dreams of maybe opening her own dance studio someday. Nothing she said was designed to impress him. She was just herself completely and unapologetically. One Thursday evening, Richard arrived at the diner alone. Danny was at a sleepover, something he'd been too nervous to try before but had finally agreed to, his confidence growing. "No Danny tonight?" Keisha asked, surprised. "Sleepover. First one ever. I'm trying not to panic." Richard smiled, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "He'll be fine. You've raised a brave kid." "I don't know about that. I think you had more to do with his bravery than I did." The diner was quiet that night, a rare slow evening. When Keisha's shift ended at 9, Richard was still there, nursing his third cup of coffee. "You waiting for someone?" she asked, untying her apron. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to get some real coffee. There's a place down the street that stays open late." Keisha hesitated. In the weeks they'd known each other, their relationship had been simple. He was Danny's father, she was the kind waitress, but this felt like something different, something more. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she said carefully. "Why not?" "Because you're you and I'm me. We're from different worlds," Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's funny? I used to think my world was better. Bigger offices, fancier restaurants, more zeros in the bank account. But my world is full of people who can't see past the surface of things. You saw my son, really saw him in the first 5 minutes of meeting him. Do you know how rare that is in my world? How valuable?" Keisha sat down across from him. "It's not about better or worse. It's about different. You have responsibilities I can't even imagine. A company, employees, probably people depending on you for their livelihoods. I serve burgers and coffee. Those things don't mix, they don't have to mix. But maybe we could just talk, as friends. As people who care about the same kid and want to see him happy." She studied his face for a long moment. Just coffee. As friends. Just coffee. They went to the late-night coffee shop, a place where college students hunched over laptops and artists sketched in notebooks. Richard felt more relaxed there than he did in any of the expensive restaurants his colleagues favored. They talked for 3 hours, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Keisha told him about growing up with her brother, about learning to see the world through his eyes, about how his death had left a hole in her family that nothing could fill. Richard talked about building his company, about the lonely climb to the top, about how success had cost him his marriage and nearly cost him his relationship with his son. I spent years chasing this idea of what my life should look like, Richard admitted. Corner office, beautiful wife, successful company. I got all of it and I was miserable. My wife left because I was never present. Danny and I were like strangers living in the same house. I was so busy trying to give him the best of everything that I forgot to just be his father. But you're changing that now, Keisha said. I see you with him. You really show up, because of you. Watching you with Danny, seeing how simple it could be just being present and kind. It woke something up in me. When they finally left the coffee shop, it was past midnight. Richard walked Keisha to her car, an old Honda that had seen better days. Thank you for tonight, he said. I needed this. Just talking to someone real. I'm always real. Can't afford not to be. She smiled, unlocking her car. Same time next week? With Danny? Definitely. But Richard found himself thinking about Keisha constantly. Not just when he was at the diner, but during board meetings, during conference calls, during the quiet moments at night when Danny was asleep. She'd gotten under his skin in a way no one had in years. The following week, Danny noticed. Kids always do. Dad, do you like Keisha? They were driving to the diner, something that had become their Tuesday and Thursday tradition. Of course I like her. She's a good friend. No, I mean, do you like her? Richard glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. What makes you ask that? You smile different when you talk about her. And you put on nice shirts now before we go to the diner. Richard had to laugh. He had been dressing better for their diner visits, telling himself it was just about taking pride in his appearance. Would it bother you if I did like her? Danny was quiet for a moment. Mom didn't like me very much. The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Danny, that's not true. Your mom loves you. She left. She left me, not you. Our divorce had nothing to do with you. She never comes to see me. Richard pulled the car over, turning to face his son. His ex-wife had moved to California after the divorce, starting a new life that apparently didn't have much room for their son. She sent gifts on birthdays and holidays, called once a month, but that was it. Richard had made excuses for her, tried to shield Danny from the rejection, but his son was smart enough to see the truth. I'm sorry, Richard said. You're right. She should visit more. She should be here more. That's on her, not on you. Keisha wouldn't leave, Danny said quietly. She's not like that. No, she's not, so if you like her, that's okay with me. She makes you happy. And she makes me happy. That's good, right? Richard felt his throat tighten. When had his son become so wise? That evening at the diner, Richard found himself looking at Keisha differently. Not just as Danny's friend or even his own friend, but as someone he could maybe build something with. Someone real, someone kind, someone who saw the world the way he was learning to see it. After Danny's dance session, after the burgers were eaten and the milkshake consumed, Richard asked Keisha if she'd like to get coffee again. Same place? She asked. Or maybe somewhere you choose. I've been monopolizing the location decisions, she smiled. There's a park near my apartment. Has a walking path along the river. It's beautiful at sunset. They went to the park the next evening. Richard had arranged for his housekeeper to stay late with Danny, something that made his son grin knowingly. The park was indeed beautiful, the setting sun painting the river in shades of gold and orange. As they walked, Keisha opened up more about her life. Her parents were retired, living in Florida. She had an older sister who was a nurse, married with 2 kids. She'd gone to community college for a year, thinking about becoming a teacher, but had to drop out when her brother got sick and the family needed her to work full-time. Do you regret it? Richard asked, dropping out. Sometimes. But I got 3 more years with my brother that I wouldn't have had. That's worth more than any degree. You could go back now. Finish your education. Maybe someday. Right now I'm saving up for that dance studio I told you about. It's a long way off, but I'm getting there. Richard wanted to tell her he could write her a check right now, cover her tuition, buy her the dance studio. But he knew that would be wrong, would change the dynamic between them. Keisha wasn't someone who needed rescuing. She was making her way in the world on her own terms, and there was dignity in that. When you open that studio, he said instead, Danny better get free lessons for life. Deal. She laughed. They sat on a bench overlooking the river as the sun dipped below the horizon. Richard found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone. About the pressure of running a company, about the loneliness at the top, about his fear that he'd damaged Danny irreparably by being an absent father for so many years. You're making up for it now, Keisha said. That's what matters. Kids don't need perfect parents. They need parents who try, who show up, who love them even when things are hard. Is that what your parents did? Yeah, we didn't have much money. My dad worked construction, my mom cleaned houses. But they showed up. Every day they showed up. When my brother was born and the doctors said he'd never walk or talk, they didn't give up. They worked with him every single day. And you know what? He did walk. Not great, but he did it. And he talked. You had to listen close sometimes, but he had so much to say. They sound like amazing people. They are. They'd like you, I think. Even though I'm an overpaid suit who drives a Mercedes. Keisha laughed. They judge people by how they treat others, not by what they drive. You're good to your son. You're kind to service workers. You tip well. That would matter to them. As the weeks turned into months, Richard's life began to look different. He still ran his company, still attended board meetings and closed deals, but he wasn't living for work anymore. He was leaving the office at 5 instead of 9, spending evenings with Danny, going to the diner, taking walks with Keisha. His business partners noticed. His assistant noticed. His ex-wife even noticed during one of her rare phone calls. You sound different, she said. Happier? I am, Richard admitted. Is there someone new? He hesitated. Were he and Keisha together? They spent time together several times a week, talked on the phone every day, but they hadn't defined it. There hadn't been any grand romantic gesture, no official first date. There's someone, he said finally. But it's complicated. His ex-wife laughed, but it was bitter. It's always complicated with you, Richard. Try to do better this time. He knew what she meant. His marriage had failed because he'd been too focused on work, too driven, too absent. He'd treated his wife like another business deal, something to be managed and maintained but never fully invested in. He didn't want to make that mistake again. The next Tuesday, Richard arrived at the diner with something unusual, a beat-up acoustic guitar. Dad, when did you get that? Danny asked, eyeing the instrument. Had it in storage. Used to play when I was younger before I got too busy being important. At the diner, Richard waited until things were slow. Then, feeling more nervous than he had in years, he pulled out the guitar. What are you doing? Keisha asked, laughing. You dance. Danny dances. I figured I should contribute something. He strummed a few chords, wincing at how rusty he was. Fair warning, this is going to be rough. But he played anyway, a simple song his father had taught him when he was Danny's age. His fingers fumbled over the chords, his timing was off, but it didn't matter. Danny was grinning and Keisha was laughing, and the other customers started clapping along. When he finished, Keisha sat down at their booth. I didn't know you played. I don't, not anymore. But I used to love it. Then I got busy, and I put the guitar away and I never picked it back up. Seemed like there were more important things to do. And now? Now I'm remembering that joy doesn't have to be practical. It just has to be real. That night, after they'd closed the diner, Keisha invited Richard and Danny to her apartment for the first time. It was small, a one-bedroom in an older building, but she'd made it warm and welcoming. The walls were covered with photos and artwork, mostly pictures of her late brother and her family. Danny was fascinated by everything. Keisha showed him her collection of vinyl records, her brother's old toys that she'd kept, photos of dance recitals she'd been in as a kid. You were a real dancer? Danny asked, his eyes wide. I took classes for years, dreamed of being on Broadway. She smiled at the memory, but life had different plans. That's okay, though. I still get to dance. She put on a record, and the three of them danced in her tiny living room. Richard, still holding his guitar, tried to play along. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. This was what he'd been missing his whole life. Not success or wealth or status. Just this. Connection. Joy. Presence. Later, after Danny had fallen asleep on Keisha's couch, Richard and Keisha sat on her small balcony, looking out at the city lights. "This is nice," Richard said. "Just being here. No pressure, no expectations. That's what life should be like, at least sometimes." "I want to tell you something," Richard said, turning to face her. "I'm falling for you. Have been for weeks now, maybe since that first night when you danced with Danny. I know we're from different worlds. I know there are complications. But I can't keep pretending this is just friendship." Keisha was quiet for a long moment. "I feel it too," she admitted. "But Richard, I'm scared. Your world is so different from mine. I serve burgers for a living. You run a billion-dollar company. What happens when you get tired of slumming it? When you realize I don't fit with your friends, your business partners, your life? You think I care about any of that? I think you might not care now. But later, when you need someone who can host business dinners and make small talk at charity galas, I don't know how to do those things." Richard took her hand. "I've done all that. The fancy dinners, the galas, the perfect corporate wife who said all the right things to all the right people. You know what I learned? It's hollow. None of it matters. What matters is finding someone who sees you, really sees you, someone who makes you want to be better, someone who reminds you what joy feels like. And I do that for you, you and Danny both. You've given me my life back, my real life, not the one I was pretending to live." Keisha leaned her head on his shoulder. "This is crazy." The best things usually are. They sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city below. A car alarm went off somewhere. A couple argued in Spanish from a nearby window. Somewhere a dog was barking. It was ordinary and real, and Richard couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this content. The relationship evolved slowly after that. Richard was careful not to overwhelm Keisha, not to try to change her world to fit his. He kept coming to the diner, kept the guitar playing sessions going, kept things simple. But inevitably his two worlds had to collide. A month later, Richard had a charity gala he couldn't skip. His company was the main sponsor, and he was expected to give a speech. He asked Keisha to come with him. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that," she said. "Then we'll find you something." "Richard, I can't afford a gown. Let me handle it, please. I want you there." Keisha was nervous about accepting, but Danny convinced her. "Dad needs you there," he said with the straightforward logic of children. "And you'll look pretty in a fancy dress." The night of the gala, Richard picked up Keisha from her apartment. She'd found a simple black dress at a consignment shop, and she looked beautiful. Not because of the dress, but because she was her. Confident, warm, real. The gala was everything Richard had warned her about. Huge ballroom, ice sculptures, champagne flowing freely. People in designer clothes making small talk about stock prices and vacation homes. Keisha felt out of place immediately, but Richard never left her side. When people asked what she did, he introduced her as the woman who taught my son to dance, and something in his tone made it clear that this was more important than any job title. They got through the cocktail hour, the dinner, Richard's speech. Keisha met his business partners, his employees, the other wealthy donors. Some were kind. Others were clearly confused about what Richard was doing with a waitress. But Keisha held her head high, answering questions about her life honestly and without shame. Then during the dancing portion of the evening, something unexpected happened. The band was playing standard ballroom music, the kind of thing people swayed to more than actually danced to. Keisha watched the couples on the floor all moving in the same careful, prescribed way. "This isn't really dancing," she whispered to Richard. He laughed. "No, it's not. Want to show them how it's done? Here, in front of all these people? Why not? You taught Danny that music doesn't care how you move. It just wants you to feel it. So let's feel it." They went out onto the dance floor, and at first Keisha tried to follow the standard ballroom steps. But then Richard whispered, "Dance your way, the real way." So she did. She let the music move through her body finding the rhythm beneath the rigid structure of the waltz. Richard followed her lead, and suddenly they weren't doing a proper waltz anymore. They were just dancing the way people dance when they forget about rules and expectations and just let the music carry them. Other couples stopped to watch. Some were scandalized, but others were smiling, remembering maybe what it felt like to dance for joy instead of for show. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence. Then someone started clapping. Richard looked up to see his CFO, a stern woman in her 60s who never smiled, applauding enthusiastically. "Now that," she called out, "was actual dancing. Well done." Others joined in. And suddenly the stiff ballroom was filled with applause. Richard pulled Keisha close, kissing her forehead. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay. That was fun." But as they left the dance floor, a woman intercepted them. She was immaculately dressed, her jewelry probably worth more than Keisha made in a year. "Richard, darling," she said, kissing his cheek. "Quite a performance. Thank you, Victoria." "Keisha, this is Victoria Hartwell. She's on our board of directors." Victoria looked Keisha up and down with barely concealed disdain. "How lovely." "And what do you do, dear?" Keisha felt Richard tense beside her, but she kept her voice calm and friendly. "I'm a waitress at Rosie's Diner downtown." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "How quaint. And how exactly did you and Richard meet?" "I served him a burger. Best decision I ever made." "I'm sure it was," Victoria said, and the implication was clear. She thought Keisha was some kind of gold digger, latching onto a wealthy man. Before Richard could say anything, Keisha spoke up. "Actually, the best part wasn't meeting Richard. It was meeting his son. Danny's an incredible kid. He's got more courage in his little finger than most adults have in their whole body." Something flickered in Victoria's expression. "You've met his son?" "Met him? I dance with him twice a week. He's got natural rhythm. Just needed someone to show him it was okay to let loose." Victoria looked at Richard, then back at Keisha, reassessing. "Richard's son has cerebral palsy. I know. Doesn't stop him from being an amazing dancer." The ice in Victoria's expression cracked just a little. "My grandson has autism. Nonverbal. People treat him like he's invisible half the time." "That's their loss," Keisha said firmly. "Kids like that have so much to teach us if we just pay attention." Victoria studied Keisha for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps I misjudged you." She turned to Richard. "Hold on to this one. She's got more substance than the last 3 women you brought to these things combined." After she walked away, Richard let out a breath. "I'm sorry about that. Victoria can be difficult. She was protecting you, I get it. People probably see me with you and think I'm after your money." "Are you?" Keisha laughed. "If I wanted money, I'd have taken the thousands of dollars you keep trying to give me. All I want is to dance with your kid and spend time with his dad. That's worth more than money." They left the gala soon after. On the drive back to Keisha's apartment, Richard was quiet. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I love you," he said simply. "And I don't care who knows it or what they think about it." Keisha felt her heart skip. "You love me?" "I do. I love that you see people for who they really are. I love that you dance in diners and aren't afraid to be yourself. I love that you taught my son that being different doesn't mean being less. I love you, Keisha. All of you." She was quiet for so long that Richard glanced over, worried. But she was smiling, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she said. "I tried not to. Told myself it was impossible. That we were too different. But I love you anyway." Richard pulled the car over right there on the side of the road and kissed her properly for the first time. It wasn't fancy or orchestrated. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way, acknowledging what they both knew was true. The next few months were a learning curve for both of them. Keisha had to adjust to being with someone whose phone rang constantly, who sometimes had to fly across the country for meetings, who lived in a world she didn't fully understand. Richard had to learn to slow down, to be present, to not try to solve every problem with money. Danny thrived through all of it. Having Keisha in their lives had transformed him. He was taking dance classes now, real ones, at a studio that specialized in working with kids with disabilities. He'd made friends there, kids who understood what it was like to have a body that didn't work the way it was supposed to, but who danced. Anyway, one Saturday afternoon, Danny's dance class was having a recital. Richard sat in the audience, nervous for his son. Danny had been practicing for weeks, but Richard knew how hard this was for him, performing in front of a crowd. When Danny's group took the stage, Richard held his breath. The music started and Danny moved. Not perfectly, not the way the other kids did, but with joy and confidence. And when he stumbled halfway through, he didn't freeze or run off stage. He just laughed, got back in sync, and kept going. The audience applauded enthusiastically when they finished. But what made Richard's chest tight with pride was seeing Danny take his bow with the biggest smile on his face. This was the same kid who 6 months ago had wanted to leave a diner because other teenagers made him feel self-conscious. Now he was dancing on stage, owning his differences, celebrating what he could do instead of mourning what he couldn't. After the recital, They went to the diner to celebrate. It had become their place, the spot where everything changed. Rosie, the owner, had become a friend. She always saved their favorite booth and made sure Danny got extra whipped cream on his milkshake. "You were amazing today," Keisha told Danny, sitting beside him in the booth. "A real performer." "I messed up in the middle," Danny said, but he was still smiling. "The best performers always do. It's how you recover that matters." "And you recovered like a pro." Richard watched them together, the woman he loved and the son he'd almost lost sight of, and felt overwhelming gratitude. A year ago, his life had looked perfect on paper but felt empty. Now it was messy and complicated and absolutely full. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant reminding him about a board meeting Monday morning. A year ago, he would have spent the weekend preparing, reviewing documents, strategizing. Now he silenced his phone and focused on the moment. The board meeting could wait. "I have something to ask you," Richard said to Keisha later, after Danny had gone to the bathroom. She looked up from her coffee, curious. "I know we haven't been together that long, and I know there are still things we're figuring out, but I also know that I don't want to do life without you. You've changed everything for me and Danny. You've shown us what really matters." He pulled out a small box and Keisha's eyes went wide. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's a promise," Richard said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring. "Not an engagement ring, not yet. Just a promise that I'm all in. That I choose you, choose us, choose this life we're building together." Keisha stared at the ring, tears welling up. "Richard, you don't have to do this. I'm happy just being with you, I know. But I want to. I want you to know that this isn't temporary for me. You're not some phase I'm going through. You're it for me." She let him slip the ring onto her finger, and when Danny came back to the table and saw it, he let out a whoop that made everyone in the diner turn and look. "Does this mean Keisha's going to be my stepmom?" "Eventually," Richard said, grinning. "If she'll have us." "Of course I will," Keisha said, pulling Danny into a hug. "You guys are stuck with me now." The next few months brought changes. Not dramatic ones, but small shifts that added up to a completely different life. Richard promoted someone to handle more of the day-to-day operations at his company, freeing himself up to be more present. He and Danny moved out of the sterile penthouse into a real house with a yard where Danny could play. Keisha kept working at the diner, but Richard helped her enroll in online classes to finish her degree. Not because he thought she needed to change, but because she'd mentioned wanting to complete what she'd started. They started talking seriously about the dance studio she wanted to open, making plans, looking at spaces. Richard's world and Keisha's world didn't magically merge into one. They remained different, sometimes frustratingly so. Richard's business associates didn't always understand why he was with a waitress. Keisha's friends sometimes felt uncomfortable around his wealth, but they made it work, building bridges between their worlds, creating something new that belonged to both of them. One evening, almost a year after that rainy night when Richard first walked into Rosie's diner, they were all there together. Danny, Richard, Keisha, and a few of the regulars who'd become like family. The jukebox was playing, and Danny was teaching one of the truckers how to dance. The man was probably 60, built like a bear, and he moved with all the grace of a refrigerator. But he was laughing, and so was Danny, and that was what mattered. Richard pulled Keisha close, swaying with her to the music. "You know what's funny?" he said. "A year ago, if someone had told me I'd find everything I was missing in a diner, dancing with a waitress while my son taught a trucker the two-step, I would have thought they were crazy. And now? Now I know that the best things in life are the ones you're not looking for, the ones that find you when you're lost and show you the way home." Keisha kissed him softly. "We found each other. That's all that matters." Later, after the diner closed and they were walking to their cars, Danny between them holding both their hands, Richard felt complete in a way he never had before, not because he'd achieved something or acquired something, but because he'd finally learned to be present, to see what was right in front of him, to value kindness and joy over status and success. His phone buzzed again. Another reminder about another meeting, another deal, another opportunity to make more money he didn't need. He glanced at it briefly, then put it away. "Dad," Danny said, "can we dance again tomorrow?" "Absolutely, champ. Where do you want to go? Can we just dance at home? All three of us?" Richard looked at Keisha and she smiled. "That sounds perfect." As they reached their cars, Richard paused, looking back at the diner. The neon sign was flickering. The building was old and tired, but inside those walls his life had changed. A chance encounter, a rainy evening, a moment of kindness from a stranger. That's all it had taken to show him what he'd been missing. "Thank you," he said to Keisha. "For what?" "For seeing Danny, for seeing me, for reminding us both that it's okay to dance even when the world tells you to sit still and be quiet." She squeezed his hand. "That's what love does. It gives you permission to be yourself." They drove home separately, because Keisha still had her old Honda and her own apartment, because they were taking things slow and doing it right. But they'd see each other tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. They'd dance in diners and living rooms and parking lots under the stars. They'd build the life they wanted, not the one they were supposed to want. And Danny would grow up knowing that being different was okay, that the world was full of people who would see him for who he really was if he just gave them the chance. He'd know that his father chose presence over profit, love over status, real connection over empty success. Richard's life didn't look perfect anymore, not on paper. He wasn't the ruthless businessman he'd once been. He left work early, spent time dancing instead of networking, dated a waitress instead of someone from his social circle. But for the first time in his adult life, he was truly happy, and in the end, that was worth more than all the billions in his bank account. Because money could buy a lot of things, but it couldn't buy what he'd found in that diner on a rainy Tuesday evening. It couldn't buy the sound of his son laughing. It couldn't buy the way Keisha looked at him like he was just a man, not a bank account. It couldn't buy the simple joy of dancing without caring who was watching. Those things were priceless. And Richard Chen, billionaire turned father turned man in love, had finally learned what true wealth really meant. It wasn't about what you owned or achieved. It was about who you loved and who loved you back. It was about being present for the moments that mattered. It was about having the courage to dance even when your body didn't move the way it should, even when the world told you to sit still. That was the real lesson. Not success or failure, wealth or poverty, ability or disability. Just the courage to show up, to be seen, to dance your own way and invite others to join you. And they did. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, and sometimes more often than that, they showed up at Rosie's diner. They danced. They laughed. They lived, and that made all the difference.